Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Filing Cabinet, Strategic Collaboration and Communications for Records Management Success. I'm Victor Rout, a Customer Success Manager here at Gimmal, and I'll be your moderator today. I've worked with many organizations on records modernization, and I know how important stakeholder engagement, clear messaging, and smart change management are to long-term success. Before we dive in, just a few quick housekeeping notes. Today's session is being recorded, and the recording will be shared afterwards. You're welcome to submit questions anytime via the Q&A panel, and we'll get to as many as possible in the live Q&A portion at the end. Here's what we'll be covering today. We'll meet our panelists, then explore real-world strategies for stakeholder communication, creating champions, and navigating change. We'll wrap up with a live Q&A, and then we'll close with upcoming events and learning opportunities. I'm joined today by a fantastic panel. Let's take a moment to hear who will be joining us. Alicia, would you mind starting us off?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I am Alicia Hernandez, and I am working with the U.S. Department of the Navy and the Office of the Naval Inspector General. I have about 20 years, small number of communications experience, working primarily with government agencies, federal, district, and local. I also have some nonprofit thrown in there, and I am very excited to be a part of today's panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Alicia. Let's go to Donda next.
Well, thanks for having me, Gimmal, and welcome everyone that's joining in today, and to my panelists as well. So yeah, I'm me. It's let's see, 20 plus years as well in this information governance records management space. Longtime practitioner. Went rogue and went to the vendor side for about 5 years, and then went really rogue and decided to run my own company, to be my own boss. So been doing this thing for quite some time, and I'm super excited for the opportunity to share my lessons learned.
Thank you, Donna. And finally, Wendy.
Yeah, hey everybody. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm really excited to learn from Alicia and Donda as we have our conversation. I'm Wendy McLean. I have been doing this for more than 35 years, and it makes me sound really old to say that. I'm not as old as that sounds. I started really young. I am currently an assistant professor of professional practice with Louisiana State University, but before that, I was a practitioner for many, many years, and I worked primarily in the energy sector. So think ExxonMobil, think Valero Energy, those kinds of places. But I also did a little bit of work with Jacobs Engineering, the state of Louisiana, in the Department of Environmental Quality. And then for a brief stint, I got out of that completely and worked in home health and hospice in records management. So I bring all of that experience now to the classroom, and I'm really excited to be doing that as sort of my reinvention for the last part of my career. And I'm super happy to be here and can't wait for this conversation. So thanks for having me.
Thank you all. Let's go ahead and dive into our first topic. Many records and IG professionals struggle to gain buy-in across departments. What's one strategy you've used to turn skeptical stakeholders into a long-term champion? And what did you learn from that experience?
Well,
Alicia.
I'll just jump right on in. I think one of the biggest things that people miss when they're trying to kind of curry favor with people is actually treating your internal people like customers. It's one thing to completely establish your stakeholder outside of your organizations, but internal communication is literally the crux of how you can disseminate correct and effective communication to your external stakeholders. For example, this job that I'm working right now, I am the first strategic communications specialist here, and there were a lot of people who didn't even understand what that meant. So literally my first year was going to the different divisions within my agency and really establishing myself and my reputation and making them understand what I can do for them as a subject matter expert in communications, and helping them to understand that I am not going to go to the news every time somebody says something wrong to me, but I can help them with my previous experience and make sure that we get the best work product out to represent our organization.
That's
Rhonda, or what do
interesting.
you
Yeah,
think?
it's interesting, Alicia, that you talk about um, treating internal stakeholders like their clients, um, because they are actually they're just internal clients.
Mhm.
And I think from one strategy that I've done is, and I say this a lot on my webinars, is I go ask them for coffee. That's my strategy. Like, what's your pain point and how can I help you? I'm like, this records management information governance thing can be a little confusing for those not versed in it.
Mhm.
But here's what I can do to help you. And what I learned from that let's go have coffee experience is they do have very specific pain points. And it depends on the type of business that they're in internally, or if it's your client. You know, one of my mentors always says, what's the business problem you're trying to solve? Well, sometimes it's really small, but sometimes that small thing can have a very large impact to their daily activity. And if that's something that I can help with, then great, fantastic. That's my role. My role is to help, whether it's one of my clients, and when I was a practitioner, internal clients. That's all I really wanted to do, was to help make their job better and easier.
Yeah, I totally agree with both of those perspectives. And I guess I would take it even one level deeper. Sometimes I need to start with my own team. So if I think back on the different places where I've worked, you know, we might be given a challenge that I have an idea for how we can solve it, or we might be given a challenge and almost a solution of like, make everybody get on board with this. And it's not my team's idea, or they wouldn't solve it that way. But it turns out after some analysis, it's the best way to go. And I think you have to start first, before you get buy-in from other departments, making sure that your department is aligned. And so in my tenure at some of the different places I've worked alongside people who have been in their jobs for a very long time. So I've been in the field for a long time, but I typically would spend between 7 and 10 years in any one job. Well, I was working with somebody that had been in their job for 38 years. 38 years, that's a lot of time spent doing things a certain way with certain expectations. And so if we're going to make a change, we're going to do something new, I've got to get that person bought in before they can be a spokesperson for my department and get buy-in from other departments. So I think that's one of the things that has worked for me, making sure my team is in alignment. And then I think it's very similar to what you guys are saying, the whole go to coffee idea. And it's approaching people as individuals. So I'm not approaching a department, I'm approaching an individual within a department. And I'm talking to that person, person to person, and I'm making a connection with them. Hey, so I'm from Louisiana, and we have a how's your mom and them, right? But Victor, you might know this from New Orleans. It's a very colloquial thing. How's your mom and them? And you have to start that way. And I am not wired that way. I'm a very analytical, get in, get out, do the job. And so I have to slow down, remember that I'm in the South and we do things a little slower, takes a little time, and you got to get to know the people that you're talking to before you approach it as a department. And then I think the other piece of that is to truly listen. So, what Donda was saying about asking them about their pain points, sometimes you have to go a little bit down the rabbit hole too with what's gone wrong in the past. Why do you feel like this isn't going to work for you? What is it that was a problem for you? Okay, well, I have some solutions for that. Are you willing to work with me on that? And it's a very personal thing. So I think that's kind of what I've learned from the experience is I can't be business, business, business all the time. I have to approach it as a person to another person, build that credibility, and then we can have the conversations about work. And that was something that took me a long time to learn and get pretty good at. So that's my strategy, and that's kind of what I've learned in the many years I've been trying to do this and trying to build consensus.
Thanks to each of you. Sounds like internal alignment, trust, consistency, and listening are all key themes here. Let's now talk about how we can shift those conversations depending on who we're speaking with. Not every stakeholder has the same language or priorities. How do you tailor your message when talking to groups like IT, legal, or risk, especially when their KPIs differ from yours?
Well, I think it's important to understand if you can get the information from them is what are their KPIs? What are their different priorities? Because then you can tailor your message a little bit more specifically. IT's, they're a little bit different entity, as most of us know. They're very technical in thought. And so sometimes you have to ask questions and tailor your messages with their hat on your head, right? And then when you go over to risk or to legal, those are the compliance hats that you have to wear, but they wear different kinds of compliance hats. So understanding what universe their job sits in my mind, helps you help them. And it is a lot about building those relationships and going to have coffee with them, because then you get to know them not just at a work professional level, but you'll also end up building those relationships into a more, hey, how's your mom and everyone, and how's your kids, and how's the dog if they're dog parents. It turns into a more intimate networking relationship that lends to them and you wanting to work with each other and to help each other out.
I agree. One of the beautiful things about being a communicator, if there's anybody on the call that's looking for a profession, communicators are awesome, is really understanding what type of messages and how to approach your team. I look at whatever organization I've been a part of as what is our mission in totality. And then I can look at how do you fit into this mission? Our legal mission makes sure that we're doing everything ethical and by the book. And if we have to be risk averse, how do you communicate to that? If we are talking to our IT systems and making sure that our customers or users have a great experience on our websites, we make sure that we tailor our messages to that. Then you add on that extra layer of personability, just making sure that am I communicating with this person in a way that they understand? As a civilian in the military, please get your words correct, because as we know, working with government entities or large agencies, your acronyms can be completely different. Um, it almost takes at least 3 to 6 months to understand your company's culture. And that includes making sure that you get the speak correctly, what your IT speak, what your legal speak, what your communicators speak. If you know that you have different genres within a particular division, get that down pat. Just to know that number one, you're leading with an empathetic lens and you're just paying attention. Again, goes right back into that internal customer service, internal communication process. Just understand that it is a journey. It is not from point A to point B, because we all know that there are several alphabets. And when you look at somebody's driver's license plates, you may see repetition of letters. Trial and error. Give yourself grace and give your other people grace as well.
I love that you mentioned the idea of the different organizations having different languages almost, you speak differently to IT versus legal. And I can remember attending, this was years ago, an ARMA presentation about records management speaking to IT, like speaking their language. And if you think about some of the terms that we take for granted, like archiving, oh, that is a completely different concept within IT than it is within library and records and archives, right? So it means something different. I can remember, this is pretty recent, in my last job, using the word disposition, and no one but me knew what I meant. And so I finally started saying disposition and or deletion and or, and like building those words together in sort of a thesaurus when I was speaking, because I spoke differently than IT, I spoke differently than legal, and then IT and legal speak differently. And so what I find is that sometimes records managers and IG folks can be that intermediary, right? Like, we get to speak all the language. We're the Rosetta Stone. We get to speak all of that. And it is really important to know how to do that. And the other thing I would add to that is not just tailoring your message related to the words that you use, but understand the priorities. So, IT might want to focus on a storage angle, right? Like the cost of storage, the strain of managing storage of information. But legal might be more concerned about the cost of discovery and how to do discovery. So I'm going to approach that with how I can help them do searching. And then risk management, depending on how integrated they are into all of that, they're going to be wanting to audit that. And so you need to understand the language, but you also do definitely want to understand the priorities so that you can fit in the how I can help you. Like Donda has been talking about, oh, this is your pain point, here's how I can help, right? And so it comes back to listening, though. We need to spend maybe as much time listening as crafting our own message.
Great insight.
Sorry, Victor. I just wanted to add something, two little somethings actually. With communicating, regardless of what you're communicating, and this kind of plays off of something that Alicia had stated, is yes, speaking in their language, but there may be different modalities that you have to communicate in, because some people are auditory individuals, some are visual, some are both. So accessibility is important because you may have folks that have trouble with both of those things. So it's knowing your audience. And I'd say that, Wendy, this plays off of what you just said, is understanding the language between them. But I have found that we records management IG professionals, we're kind of a conduit, and we're kind of the ones that can speak the text, speak and translate to business and business to IT, so we can help bridge those gaps in between the various different teams. And I don't know what it is about us, but we're just wired, I think, a little bit differently, because we can see understand the pain points from all sides, and we're able to, and some of my colleagues hate this word, but I love it, holistically bring those things together and build the bridge versus just having little pieces and parts started. So I find that we're an odd ducks, but in a very good way.
And I want to tap into something about the different modalities that you mentioned, because you also have to pay attention to your audience and the level, right? So an email that I would send to a coworker is not the same level of detail as the email that I would send to a vice president. And that took me a while to learn. Like, how do the people in your organization communicate and at the different levels in your organization. Alicia, you kind of mentioned this when you said the culture. It takes you 3 to 6 months to figure out the culture and how do I communicate with someone that's up here at this level versus somebody that's maybe on my own level or 1 or 2 levels up. And there's not a hard and fast rule for that, but you do over time learn that within your organization. I noticed that there was a question that kind of goes in right here. They're saying, how do you tailor RIM concepts to elected officials? I'm sure that we could speak on that, but one thing that I have found helpful, and I can't believe that I use AI because, a year ago I wasn't, but I find that I can write something and then I can put it into ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot, and I can say, assume my audience is XYZ and tailor this for the audience. And I find that it helps me. I might not take it verbatim, but it helps me see the difference between if I say, write this at a basic entry level or write this at a VP level, and it will use different words and it'll break things up a little differently, and I find that to be a helpful tool.
Oh, the dreaded 2 letters, AI.
Sorry.
No, it's in tailoring your writing. There's a need to understand the different emerging platforms. I spent a lot of time managing social media, and I remember at one point, oh gosh, AI is just a thing that you just don't talk about. That's the redheaded stepchild that you just push to the side. We are now doing trainings on how you use your prompts and what you're supposed to do when you use your prompts. Of course, please continue. This is not an endorsement for AI. I just want to throw in that micro machines kind of disclaimer right now. But if you are super duper traditional and you just have to write your own words, sometimes AI can make sure you're in the right tense. Sometimes you need to make sure that you're an active voice. Sometimes if you've worked in the government for a long time, you use a whole bunch of prepositional phrases. There are people who love the flowery language. Sometimes AI can just chop it down for you. So, but that also goes into what my fellow panelists were saying, just understanding and knowing your audience. If you are a Brene Brown brand, like fan, like I am, leading with empathy and understanding that everybody has a sense of vulnerability when they're meeting a new person. It's not going to be a very cut and dry kind of thing, especially if you're a new kid on the block and you meet somebody with 35, 40 years in one particular job that may seem to be the guru, the institutional knowledge. And here you are, this young upstart saying, I think I can do this better. There's a way of doing said things and making sure that you encourage the team aspect.
Love that. It's clear that knowing your audience, understanding priorities, and the ability to adapt your framing is a very powerful way to, build alignment. Let's move into rollout strategies. How do we get people excited about what's coming? Policy updates and changes, rollouts can easily get lost in the shuffle. What elements have you found most effective in creating momentum and excitement around a new records or IG program?
I wanted to chime in here because when we were looking at these questions this week, I think we all chuckled and said, people get excited about IG programs? Really? And my comment was, I am a Brene Brown fan, but I'm also a Mel Robbins fan, and I love her podcast. And one of the things that she talks about is this idea of anxiety. And I feel like anxiety actually is the emotion, not excitement, that most often comes along with a new program or a new rollout. But her trick and what she talks about is turning anxiety into excitement. And so I think that's the tie-in here. Like, how do you approach somebody and say, okay, I understand this is a change, and it kind of comes back to change management, just basic change management principles, right? Anytime something is new, it is going to feel overwhelming. We first kind of react. There's this change management curve that I love You know, you start out with frustration maybe and a little bit of denial, but then, and it might get worse. It might even go into depression, but eventually you start kind of interacting with this idea of the change and you play with it. And you think about how it could be better and how it could be different. And the more you allow yourself to be creative and play, the less overwhelming it feels. And the more you can kind of accept that and roll with it and build on it and grow into it. And so that's the momentum piece. It's helping people through that change management curve, recognizing that that is a process that you can help people through if you have tools, you're communicating, you're supporting, you're, you know, engaging, you're training, you're doing these things to help them through this curve. Then you can turn that anxiety into excitement at the end.
I think the word process goes right into the word spectrum, because there is a wonderful spectrum of communications where you meet people where they are. There are some people who only speak metrics and only speak facts. And in your process of figuring out how you communicate with your team, if you just have a numbers person like our wonderful folks in finance and accounting, all right, we need to establish this percentage of X to get to Y. And this is the reason why we have to make this change. If you have your senior level officials, or if you have your executive level folks, your C-suite people, all right, you have to develop the world's most beautiful elevator speech just to make sure that they get it, you get it, and you know that your message is going to be received. It's really just a matter, I cannot stress this enough. It is really a matter of knowing and understanding your audience. Sometimes you have to jump in with both feet, prepare to be completely submerged in whatever materials, even if you feel uncomfortable. But as communicators, I completely agree with Donda. We are the conduits where we translate how we should get whatever changes or whatever necessary information to be considered effective to our teams. It's not an easy thing. Change, especially if you have like an older staff, people who have been on staff for more than 5 years. And depending upon where you are, if you're in a more educational environment or if you're in a more government environment, you may have people that literally come out to pasture to to your specific agency that stay there for 40, 50 years just because they love the organization. Just really take into account, I say this, I'm not an author or anything, but that grace that you give and that understanding of where you're supposed to meet your people will be literally the catalyst of whether you either pass or fail this whole new change. Um, I just, again, I cannot stress enough. Just take your time, have patience, and do not think that Rome is going to be built in a day.
Amen to that, Alicia. Definitely. I'll add a little bit of the fun aspect, the excitement aspect to trying to get that momentum. I don't know that it's overly exciting of a topic, quite honestly, but you can make it fun. Your communications can be fun. Your training can be fun. In the profession of information management, there's a records and information management month in April. It's a dedicated month, and a lot of organizations that have records managers try to do things to elevate the message of whether it's a new program coming in or it's, hey, just a reminder, we're out here to help. There are ways and modes that you can make that messaging funny, memorable. You can send out scavenger hunts online. You can incorporate prizes for certain things. There are ways that you can incorporate gamification into your program. And one of our colleagues, Ryan Zilm, is a master at this. Learn from him. I try to pay attention to what he's doing, because it's a cool way to get people to learn and to remember. And if you're not up on the gamification in general, I would encourage anyone that's doing a IGRM program to check it out, because it will help you communicate and it will help people remember why you're there.
Yeah, and you're right, Donna. His presentations are really spot on, and he does have a gift for making things fun. And I think, one of the things that I've seen happen that sort of locks that in for me is it starts to build a sense of teamwork. Anytime you can have a little bit of competition or teamwork, it really helps underscore the message. And so at one of the places that I worked, our wellness committee actually came up with this idea that we would have like a cleanup day, but not for office materials, but for anything anybody had at home. And so it encompassed any sort of records that they had that they wanted shredded. It was also a pill take back day. So they coordinated it with the local organization that did pill take back. And year after year, it grew so that it was paper, it was the Great Pills and Paper Purge plus. And, and then we started taking cell phones and devices and fluorescent bulbs. But that did create excitement. And we were a part of that team, but we were part of a bigger team. And so when you can find those opportunities, say yes. If somebody comes and says, hey, do you want to be a part of this thing? And at first it doesn't really sound like it's going to resonate. Like, how am I going to get people to understand my program? Didn't matter if they understood my program. It mattered that they saw me and my team in our t-shirts that said, company name volunteer. And, and that we were out there serving our coworkers in this initiative. And so anytime you can find a way to have fun, I think say yes to that.
Thank you. Thank you. Gamification and peer advocates really go a long way. Let's build on that by looking at how we show success, especially in a way that resonates with others. So we all know that compliance is a baseline, right? But to win support, we often need to go beyond it. In your experience, what's the most compelling way to demonstrate the value of a records program beyond compliance? And how do you bring that to life? With data, reports, stories, or something else?
I am a huge, huge testimony fan. Not just because, you want people to hear the good graces of your organization, but you actually see the people that it impacts. You see how something has helped. And even if you just get the feedback from somebody and you don't make it like a big flashy thing on your website or in your newsletter or anything, sometimes having that feeling that you've affected that one person um, gives you the courage to not only keep going, but to do better. We have several opportunities to go out and speak with people during facilitations. And there are just some folks that, you're going to hear a complaint here or there, but sometimes that one complaint may only just reside on that one person. But that one person that tells you, I saw a reduction in, my cost of living, or I was able to actually get my child into some sort of services, or one of the things that I actually got to initiate on my job, we did a Bring Your Child to Work Day celebration that had been dormant for a while. And the people that I work with would just say, I didn't know that people were even interested in knowing that I had children. It was just kind of a passing, fleeting kind of thing. And, this is like my third year being involved with it. It has become such a almost like an institution at this point, where we were able to get people involved and care and excited about doing something that had another extension and another facet of someone else. And it makes a huge difference of having your coworkers and having your team in totality know that you care, and then they come back to you and tell you how it has affected them. And sometimes it turns into a great testimony.
That's amazing. I can't take credit for this phrase, but I definitely have lived it over and over and over. But I would like to share that I think it was Michael Haley that had said this to me, said, never let a good disaster go to waste. And I love that because I have lived through that a number of times. I didn't have the phrasing for it, but the key there is if something significant happens, seize the opportunity to capitalize on that and leverage that. And I can think of two specific examples in the various jobs that I've had. The first one, and this is gonna, you guys know I've been around a long time. This is gonna date me. I was working at Exxon during the Exxon Valdez disaster in Alaska. And that became the catalyst that created a company-wide records management program, like in a big way. And so the folks that worked in the headquarters office at that time definitely took to heart, don't let a good disaster go to waste, right? And the other one was, I got hired on at Amedisys Home Health and Hospice specifically because they were under federal investigation with intense scrutiny from the DOJ. And they had never had a records manager. They were a 30-year-old startup company that just blossomed and had never had a records manager. And they were trying to prove that they did things by the books and that they were correct. And they couldn't lay hands on the information that they needed in a timely manner. And so they hired me in. So they took that same advice, don't let a bad situation go to waste, like pivot and make a correction and do something. And so I think that's sort of that storytelling in a way. It's not so much relying on data and reports. I think that resonates with a certain type of person, engineers specifically, but the rest of us, I really like words. I like stories. I like to connect to like my shared experience. And so I think those times when something bad happens, if you can step in and you can say, I think I can make this better, don't let it go to waste. Use that bad thing and turn it around.
Yeah, I agree with my two co-panelists. It really is about storytelling. And you can storytell in various different ways. You can storytell through data, through KPI reports. You can storytell through infographics, or you can write a blog. The testimonials, and Alicia, you stole that word from me because that's exactly where I was going, but kudos. Yeah, testimonials, that's the greatest in my mind. That is like one of the greatest compliments. If someone is willing to do a testimonial, whether it's internal or one of your clients to put on your website or your internal intranet, and they tell the story from their hat that they wear. I think that gives an extreme amount of credibility to the partnership that happened between the two groups and the work that the records management information governance team did to overcome that potential naysayer at one point, because I see naysayers as opportunities to win them over. And those are really the ones that are constantly complaining, the squeaky wheel, as the terminology goes. If you can get one of those squeaky wheels to get you a testimonial after working with them and really hearing them out, that's going to bring the success story to life. And if the two groups are willing to partner together to tell that story across an organization or out into the universe of, social land, all the more power to you, because I think the story is what it's about. It's not always about numbers. And yes, senior leadership and finance, they want to see numbers, they want to see percentages, they want to see dollars down in savings. Great. That's their story. That's the story you have to tell to them. But the story that impacts the individual sitting within the HR department that has an issue with finding their information is probably the same story the rest of the team is having. They're just not voicing it necessarily. And if you can help that one person, and then that automatically helps the rest of the team because you've been able to synthesize some things for them, that's your story. And you need to make sure that you're staying on top of those stories. A lot of records managers and IG people in my career tend to be the introvert side of personality types. And honestly, I was one of those people for a very long time. And I decided that I was going to push myself not being that person. And now everybody was like, probably saying, Donda, you were an introvert. Yeah, I was. Still am sometimes. But I love people and I love communicating. I love meeting people. I love hearing their stories. And what I say about the introvert extrovert thing is you have to, as an RMIG person, you have to be a little bit extroverted because you have to want to communicate so that you can better understand where they sit, what their problems are, and help them overcome them. And you have to be out there to be able to do that.
Excellent, excellent. Storytelling and showing business value seems to be the unlock there. Our final question centers on change resistance, which is something I believe we all face at one point or another. Resistance, it shows up differently depending on the environment. Question is, what's a challenge you faced in both public and private sectors, and how did you overcome it?
So I'll make you all laugh really quick. So in my prior life, with working with another government agency, I was not a communicator. I was a training specialist. And the training specialist was housed in human resources. So there was layer upon layer upon layer right there. And because I was the extrovert in a very introverted department, um, literally just trying to get people to talk to me. Like walking into somebody's office, some people just did not do FaceTime. And this is pre-COVID, FYI. So this was just, I work in my office with my doors closed. This is just how I do it. And you need to make an appointment in order to come see me. Okay. We remember how we cater to our internal customers, right? All right. Everybody wrote that down in their notepads. All right, great. I made all the appointments. And we had two offices. One was about 4 blocks away. But how you establish your reputation as a communicator, not only just to get the testimonial, not only just to get the metrics, not only just to make sure you get your records management, you make sure and ensure that your reputation is solid. Always keep your word. And if you have to do follow-ups, if that's how I need to meet you and I need to make an appointment to come see you, perfectly fine. That's absolutely fine. How we get our message out together and I show you that I am willing to work with you, I will meet with you how many times that I need to. Anyone that I've worked with, and I've had some doozies of people that I've worked with that were extremely adversarial, as well as some people who were a little overly friendly. You establish your boundaries and you respect others' boundaries. And then you get to work. You roll up your sleeves and say, okay, this is why we're here together. You don't want me, you don't want to have coffee with me? Fine, that's your loss. Starbucks is right up the street. That's perfectly fine. But if we can establish a good working relationship, then that's how we're going to overcome these humps of I don't understand what she's doing. I don't really know why she's here. She's a communicator. She has a communications degree. What is she doing in training? I am the communications subject matter expert in training. And that's how I had to explain myself. And I had left that job after 6 years. And I can remember being in Japan, about 13 hours away, and still getting a phone call from my then supervisor, my old supervisor at that job, saying, "Are you sure you don't want to come back?" So it's just about, again, meeting people where they are, respecting where other people are, and just telling yourself, I can do this. I can overcome this because I need to meet my mission.
I think that's a pretty good testimonial, Alicia, when they called you and asked you to come back. That's pretty amazing. I've worked in the public sector and the private sector, and I've jumped back and forth a little bit. So I think that there is a misperception when you work in government that the corporate sector has unlimited budgets. And when you're in the government and you can't get anything, you think, oh, I can't wait until I get into a corporate environment where I have a budget and I'm in charge of it and I can spend it. And I can remember being at Exxon when we were going through a downturn, and there was literally one kind of pen that we were allowed to buy. Like, budgets were just as tight in the corporate sector as they were in the public sector. And that was a surprise in the beginning for me. And so, how you overcome that, you just have to kind of like wash away all those preconceived notions that you have about, working in the public sector versus the private sector, and dig into your specific organization and figure out that culture. And in that situation where you're fighting budget, I overcame it by just knowing my business, knowing exactly what we needed to do, having a firm plan, selling my plan, and then providing justification, like data, data, data. Here's what we need. Here's why we need it. Here's how much it's going to cost. Here has how much it's going to save. All of that we do all the time. But I think just the surprising part was that is not something that is only going to happen in public versus private. It's going to be the same. And the other thing is, there's this preconceived notion, I think, in public sector or in private sector, thinking about the public sector, that, everything just takes so long. And that is true. I can tell you from experience, things get done faster in the private sector than they do in the public sector. And I can remember working at Exxon. And the example is, we needed to have a door closed in, and it was going to become a hallway. And we put in the work order, and it was done from Friday to Monday, like it was done. And then we had a similar situation when I was working for the state, and I think that was like a 9-month process. So that was one of those preconceived notions that actually turned out to be somewhat true. But I think, again, it can depend on your specific situation. And you just have to remember what you bring to the equation, and know your stuff, present it well, justify it. And that's how you overcome these crazy little challenges that pop up in both of those worlds.
Donna, before you go, I just want to be mindful of time. I want to leave, time for the Q&A at the end.
Sure.
So yes. All right.
Yeah. So I would just add real quickly, and I think it kind of speaks to what both Alicia and Wendy have said. I've done some stints in state government and very heavily on the financial services private side of life. And what I have found, the challenges is that red tape that Wendy alluded to. Like, it does take forever, but quite honestly, public and private, they both have their red tapes, and they both have to have, committee by committee to make decisions. But what a challenge I faced in state government specifically was trying to develop that training material Alicia had alluded to. Their trainer person had a very rigid mindset of how it needed to be done. And how I overcame getting through that rigidness is having a conversation with them as to why it had to be a certain specific way. And what we found through the conversational process was that it's a cultural thing, but it was also a preconceived notion by the individual themselves. And that's how they've always done it, that, 20+ year person in that role. This is how I do it. This is my regimen. But when you're talking about training materials for a specific type of software, it doesn't necessarily lend to the same way this person was trying to do it. And so we compromised. I showed them how the system worked. And then we worked on, well, let's use their language in the training material and incorporate some of that cultural aspect that in the ways that she's always done it. And we compromised because we had to, because you couldn't do both so differently that the target audience would not have resonated or learned from that material. So that's from the public side. In the private sector, a little bit easier, but you still have to kind of do the same thing. You still have to meet them where they are. So I would say just communicate and listen. Listen is the big thing.
Appreciate those stories, ladies. It's clear that no matter the sector, meeting people where they are, persistence and empathy matter. All right, let's shift into Q&A. We've got some great questions coming in. I will read the first one. I have long said records people have to be able to speak their customer group's language. However, do you have any suggestions for how to tailor RIM concepts to elected officials?
Research, first research. If there are certain subjects and topics that your elected official is very passionate about, sometimes you really have to, not going to say hit them where it hurts, because that's setting a bad precedent, but really let them know, if I have to use this example on something that you're passionate about, this is how this will affect said topic. If you know that it's housing or manning or actually you've gotten dinged on any type of assessment, this is, if we don't make these changes here, sir, ma'am, we need to make sure that we can tailor said thing with the appropriate metrics, with the appropriate records, and, of course, respectfully listen to their ideas, because we've learned that active listening is the key, and make that compromise. That's the other key word that Donda said, was like, yes, we need to make sure that that happens. So that would just be my advice from my experience.
Some thanks, Alicia. Wendy, Donda, would you like to weigh in on this one?
Now, I think from my perspective, Alicia kind of summed it up pretty well. So
Agree.
Sure. Keep the questions coming, guys. We got another one. How do you handle records and systems that weren't designed for records management, like email, chat, or shared drives? Wendy, I know you've worked in academic environments where this is somewhat of an issue. Do you have a perspective on this?
I think you've got to prioritize. And first of all, you have to have buy-in that this is something worth pursuing. So, there's always part of me that, because I've always reported to IT, it's like, oh, well, here's the software that can do this for us. It's, yes, these things are not meant to be in a records management system, so we're gonna force them in there, square peg, round hole. It doesn't matter what I think. It matters, does the organization want to do this? And how do I make this a priority? And how do I get them to understand it? And then once you understand it, you can start reviewing the technology and figuring out the how to do it. But you first have to get buy-in that it is something that you need to do.
Thank you, Wendy. Again, keep the questions going. We probably have time for one or two more, but we'll go on. Okay, so the question is, what's the best way to educate end users about their records responsibilities without overwhelming them? Anyone want to take this one?
Oh, me.
Go ahead.
So, I'm a huge advocate, and this is what I do in my business with my clients, is building communities of practice. So it's not just about the records management, information governance teams throwing things out at the end users, right? At some point, it's going to go in maybe the internal newsletter, or it's going to be on an intranet site, or wherever it may be communicated, and people start glazing over it, right? But if you have communities of practice, such as liaisons or coordinators that support the information governance practices to that specific business unit, they can help with that communication. They can help get their teams on board because they know their internal team culture a lot better than Donda Young does coming in to try and tell them, whether it's verbally or through a video or through a newsletter or some communication. They know how to spin some things to help send that IGRM message to them that's going to work well for their team. So that would be one way that I would suggest, is building your communities of practice.
I have another buzzword for you all. Hopefully you guys are putting them on your bingo boards that are listening out there. The word is over communicate. You have several mechanisms of communication, starting from word of mouth to your newsletter, to your intranet, to your internet, your public facing website. Use them all. Use each and every one of them. You know, you may have somebody that only communicates via email. You have people that, don't get it unless you're literally in their face and say, you have to do this records management this way. Some people need a little bit more hand holding. Some people, you just throw a chart up there and, the visual learner just takes over. Use all of your modalities, because you'll get one person that one time that said, I didn't see it. Oh, let me point this out to you, and throw out however many links that we need to get you to where you need to be. One of the things that I appreciate about my job is we operate as an echo chamber to make sure that people understand the mission and the reason why we do what we do. This is one of the reasons why I fell in love with the job that I'm doing now, because I do a little bit of everything using the skills that I've learned over the years. And that over communication just ensures that anyone from any walk of life and any type of learning style will get that message. So over communicate when possible, but of course, keep in mind you meet people where they are.
Thank you, Alicia, and thank you, participants, for those great questions. That brings us to the end of today's session. Got a little trigger happy. Huge thank you to Alicia, Donda, and Wendy for sharing your time and experience, and thank you all for being here with us today. As a reminder, the recording will be sent out shortly, and if you'd like to continue your learning, check out the upcoming sessions at gimmal.com/events, including ARMA, InfoCon, ARMA Greater Los Angeles, Nagar, and more. Take care, and we hope to see you again soon.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.